So there's not a great deal of science in the talk this evening. There is some science behind it, and I might refer to a little bit as we go through. But really, I want to tell you about how kidney medicine has changed over the last 20 years and some of the drivers for that, and perhaps draw some parallels with medicine more generally, or healthcare more generally. So this is a slide from 1997, and this is a 20th century success story. This lady's got spina bifida, and she's on renal replacement therapy. You can see a dialysis fistula there. And those of you that are involved in flying planes might know that you have to be transplanted to be able to get your pilot's license. So this is a really resilient lady, a fabulous story, a great story of success that a lot of people rightly could take credit in. The sort of problem with that success is, however, that this lady had an at-risk urinary tract that was neglected, and when she came to Hope Hospital, which was in March 1992, which was the week I started as a consultant, she had significant pressure sores from what we would call neglect now at a sister hospital. It's more ignorance, I think, and we're all part of that ignorance and building a system which was more about dialysis and transplantation than one about prevention where we can prevent. So kidney medicine, like all medicine these days, is a team affair. And the issue with these kind of slides is, well, who did you miss off? It's like a wedding. Who did you forget to invite there? And of course, the first time that I made this slide, the key people, patients and carers, were omitted from the slide. So that says quite a lot. We're still missing quite a lot of people here. We're mixing the backroom staff that manage the system, that make it possible to deliver healthcare, and we're missing the scientists and research staff that try and answer, and sometimes do answer, the questions that lead us to be able to then make significant changes in the way people are cared for. So there are risks with that slide. So whilst dialysis might be construed as one of the two big advances in terms of technical aspects of healthcare of the late 20th century, with cardiac bypass perhaps being the other one, the outcomes of renal replacement therapy, and particularly dialysis, are not good. So people on dialysis in general terms have survivals that are less than many common cancers. And this is European and US data in blue and red respectively, showing expected remaining life years, and then for the general population and the dialysis population. So a 25-year-old on dialysis has a cardiac mortality of a 75 or 80-year-old in the general population, and that's a significant problem. So cardiac disease, vascular disease, is the key issue for people with kidney disease, and that's partly hypertension and the associated diseases that cause renal failure, and partly some specific factors about the syndrome condition of renal failure, whether that's uremic cardiomyopathy or whether that's vascular calcification on top of more general atherosclerotic disease. So if you're transplanted with a successful transplant, you have a 5 times increased risk of death from a vascular event than an age and gender-matched control. So it remains a major challenge. So back then in the 1990s, the problem as we framed it was that we needed more dialysis units. The job was to go out and negotiate and get more dialysis units in place, because dialysis was growing at 6 to 8% per annum. And yet we knew that there were plenty of things that we could do to delay the onset of renal failure, or even prevent renal failure, on the basis that we start dialysis when the kidney function's less than 10% of normal, and people are usually pretty fit and well if the kidney function is 30 or 35% of normal. And we're particularly focused at that time on the issue of late referral and delayed starts to dialysis. And I'm not going to show the data, but we published data to show that people that start in an unplanned fashion, people that crash land onto dialysis, have 3 times the mortality and twice the number of bed days in their first year of dialysis. So a serious economic problem and a serious quality and healthcare problem. And what do we need to do to slow down kidney disease? Well, the kidney is a vascular organ, the glomerulus is a glorified blood vessel, and it's not rocket science. So back in the 1990s and even in the early 2000s, we actually had very little evidence to support the fact that kidney disease was truly a vascular disease, and we can still argue that, and in some cases the primary driver isn't vascular. But it was kind of common sense that these were the kind of interventions that would improve kidney disease management, and some of the work that Phil and Rachel Middleton and Rob Foley, when he was here, led on in the crisis study, have identified lipids and smoking, etc., as being factors that are modifiable and are associated with adverse outcomes. And very, very soon we'll be looking at exercise in a formal randomised controlled trial to see its impact on renal failure. So we concentrate. Someone asked me when I went for an SR job once, they said, why do people rob banks? And of course the answer is because there's money in the banks. And why are people interested in end-stage renal failure? Because that's where the money is. And really end-stage renal failure management is the reason for the discipline of nephrology. If we didn't have that, then I think we'd have people interested in kidney stones and tubular function and some of the molecular biology elements of things. We would have that blue skies kind of science, but we would not have kidney medicine and kidney care across the country and now out into primary care. The cost, I'm not going to go through this in any detail. This is some costing data we published about a year ago. The cost of dialysis and transplantation is around about 1.5% of the NHS spend for a very small population, and as I've shown you, not the best of outcomes. So that's a significant spend, and yet the preventative costs would be much, much less. So back then, this is kidney disease. This is a slide of the number of randomised controlled trials since, I haven't put my glasses on. Yes, that's when Leeds won the Premiership. Yes, since sort of time immemorial. And, kidney disease, people were interested in the rare diseases, and we did less research in the rare diseases in terms of RCTs at that time than obviously cardiovascular cancer and GI disease. So we were looking, I think, last week, was it, Phil, at some data that shows that this has been changed remarkably over the last decade, and I'm not going to show you that data now, but it was almost an evidence-free zone, and it was definitely something that you needed to be a clever old person to look after kidney disease. It was a bit sort of geeky, and I think it was poorly taught at medical, so it was made difficult rather than made easy. So the issue was how to actually engage people and simplify some of that message. Chronic renal insufficiency, it's a bit like being obtunded. Well, what's obtunded? So the Glasgow Coma scale actually transformed how we could look after people with reduced levels of brain function. And the term chronic kidney disease, despite being a difficult term for people with kidney disease, because chronic means something different to the general population than it does to the healthcare professionals. And it's a good thing actually to some of our children, but my children are a bit older than teenagers, so chronic, so it's chronic, it's good. And disease obviously implies that people are unwell, and it is a silent risk factor in many instances. So it's not a great term, but it's a unifying term, and it allowed us to really demystify kidney disease, that allowed us to move upstream from renal failure to a prevention. So the rest of the talk, I'm going to talk about the Lessons that we've learned in terms of prevention and early detection and prevention. The importance of engaging with the service users, patients, customers. I'm not sure what the right phrase is for people who have kidney disease and people who have other disease processes. It's difficult to get something that really moves you from a power relationship of doctor-patient to something that's not either goes against the grain in terms of customer when we don't actually have a market for healthcare, which is, in my opinion, is a good thing. Anyway, the involvement of people in the choices that are relevant to them for preference-sensitive decisions, which has clearly got general applicability. And then return to the kidney for safety and the issue of acute kidney injury, which is probably where CKD was 10 or 15 years ago and is a major safety issue for the NHS. So the demystification of kidney disease really came from a classification. This is a Kadoki classification that was published in about 2002 it was, that used the glomerular filtration rate, the filtration rate of the kidney as the way in which we would classify the severity of kidney disease from stages 1 through to 5. One needed chronicity, so reduced kidney function for greater than 3 months. And these are the various categories, and people that know about this will know that over time we've split category 3 into 3A and B, and will know that following the NICE guidance, which was 2008, that we've emphasised the importance of proteinuria, which is the new black, it is the new cholesterol there. And it was this kind of a gross oversimplification that I don't see any anaesthetists or surgeons in the audience that made it understandable. EGFR equals percentage kidney function. My mum can understand that, and she's 92, and says, well, how come it's 59 and it's low? And I say, don't worry about it. So there are problems with this gross simplification. And it's based on the problem of, if you can see that, a serum creatinine of 120 in a little old lady might mean that her kidney function is 30, whereas a serum creatinine of 120 in a strapping young hod carrier is normal kidney function. So normal kidney function is round about a filtration rate of 100 mils per minute, but we look at the serum creatinine to infer the filtration rate. And it's a difficult inference to make, to look at the patient, look at their gender, and compute the 120 into whatever the GFR will be, because the serum creatinine is a function of the muscle bulk, which is to do with gender. Females have less muscle than males. Race, black people win the Olympic Games contest more than white people, and age. So there is a calculation that can turn the creatinine into the GFR, and it's far from perfect, and it's a population-based measure, but it actually worked. And this is a demonstration of the impact of moving from a creatinine only to a GFR as well concept, and this demystification. And important to note, this is before April 2006. So this is data from Q Research, a population base of around about 3.4 million. And what you can see is that kidney disease didn't used to exist, so we were worried about our jobs and all sorts of things. Renal failure obviously existed within dialysis units and transplant units, but it wasn't visible in the general within primary care or across the rest of the health system, wasn't recognised, wasn't coded. So this is kind of coding data, coding behaviour. And what you can see is that once people started to realise that kidney disease was a bit more common, then it was picked up, particularly in the elderly. This is people above the age of 75. And what you can see is the 20 per thousand, so 2% rate of CKD in the above 75-year-old group is still a pretty low rate in terms of what we know. And I'll come on to that shortly. Okay, so what we wanted to do was to move from this renal failure with lots of complications and early progress to end-of-life care and death, to move upstream to reduce this. That was the aim that we've been at in the last 10 or 15 years. So we got people's attention with the GFR business and the demystification concept of percentage kidney function, and it was systematised by inclusion into the primary care quality and outcomes framework, the pay for performance system that's used to reimburse primary care largely for chronic disease management. So primary care paid to create a register, measure blood pressure and achieve blood pressure targets, block the renin-angiotensin system if there's protein in the urine, and measure the amount of protein in the urine. And that's the latest iteration of the CKD QOF. Now, it wasn't accepted by everybody straight away that this was necessarily a good thing, and this was one of the sort of Daily Mail levels. The Pulse came out with this statement, but in actual fact it wasn't rocket science, and very soon primary care were able to say, well, actually, yeah, we can get on with this, we can manage this as a vascular risk factor. Although some people said, well, you know, isn't it just normal aging? And so, well, why bother with the elderly? Well, of course, the elderly consume the majority of the NHS spend, and it's not just Germans and Greeks that get renal failure. So if you then look at the whole population, this is from Health Survey England, and in an ideal world you'd want to get this kind of information before you developed a policy and implemented a policy for early detection. But the reality of things is that life isn't a linear process, and the evidence often comes after the fact rather than before the fact. Anyway, the point of this slide is this is the CKD prevalence 3 to 5. So this is what is recognised in primary care, kidney function less than 60%. And as you can see, it is common in people above the age of 65 and in the elderly. But if you look at proteinuria, so proteinuria is damage, whereas this is damaged. So this is reduced kidney function. Proteinuria tells you will have reduced kidney function over time and is an independent vascular risk factor. Proteinuria, males and females, occurs much earlier than actually reduction in kidney function, as one would expect. So this really should be the target, but of course we don't go round having lots of urine measured, urine protein measured, where we did go round having serum creatinine measured. Felicity will tell us, but millions and millions and millions and tens of millions of time per year across the country. And again, back to the sort of football theme for the sort of geeky ones of us. This was the first year of the Quality and Outcomes Framework, and a number of PCTs and the locally, and the highest and the lowest within the 3 sectors of the what was then Northwest SHA. So you can see here in Liverpool, each line represents an individual practice, and you can see this a lot of single-handed practices, a lot of socioeconomic deprivation, a lot of attention to all sorts of inverted commas important factors, which really are important. That means that here in this particular locality, you know, they were slower off the mark than elsewhere. But like Bolton, where Steve Liversidge turned this from the relegation zone in terms of PCTs up to the best PCT in the country, people don't like to be towards the bottom of the league table. Even people, you know, that traditionally will find it very difficult to get towards the top of the league table, you know, do like to compete. So, sorry to digress there. And they're filming it as well. So the intention, of course, isn't to identify people, it's to reduce people's risk and to reduce people's problems. So the first time that this slide got an airing, it actually had CMO in there, and it was a slide for Liam Donaldson to say this is what we needed to do. And the chronic disease management paradigm that it describes really is stolen from borrowed from diabetes. Create a register so you know the people that you've got, recall people and intervene into their risk factors. So that requires some integration, information technology, information like trial information, what to do, as well as information for patients. But of course the important player is the person who needs the encouragement and support to make the behavioural changes or adhere to the medicines and so on and so forth here through that individual care plan. That's something that we continue to struggle with. What is a care plan and how do we integrate it is the issue of the moment. Anyway, our kidney issues were based on this platform of the GFR equals percentage kidney function and proteinuria equals risk. And this is what we wanted to do. We wanted to identify people early, and we knew we had interventions that if kidney function was declining, we could slow the decline to end-stage renal failure with need for dialysis at about 10 mils per minute. And that could make the difference in terms of years, and that could make the difference in terms of ever reaching this endpoint of needing dialysis. And we knew that from the diabetes paradigm, and we had supportive evidence from other types of kidney disease. And we were also able to demonstrate that this is data from a project that we ran in Lincolnshire in the mid to 2000s, and what it shows is that if people have got stable kidney function and come along to kidney services and get all the various inputs, then thankfully their kidney function remains stable. It doesn't get better, which is a little bit of a disappointment, but at least it doesn't get worse. But for those with declining kidney function, and this is 30 mils per minute, so those with historically declining kidney function before enrolment in a managed care plan and a systematic approach to vascular reduction as well as planning for the future, we can change the slope of that curve and we can improve the outcomes. We can extend the time to end-stage renal failure management. So the issue about how we integrate care or how we get better vascular management and avoid terrible things like people having strokes or people having massive heart attacks or people having end-stage renal failure, where they're essentially the same thing, catastrophic problems within the organ system that is particularly affected. How we go upstream, how we identify people, how we support the behavioural change, how we get our legislators to tackle the food industry, how we deal with W.H. Smiths that if you take a packet of crisps from them as you buy your sandwich is cheaper, is a real big problem. Anyway, back to the Clark business. These are local practices. These are Salford practices, I think, and I won't go through the two phases of practices. But this is blood pressure control to nice targets, not to quaff targets. They're pretty tight targets, and what you can see is that by quality improvement and working with practice managers and practice nurses and general practitioners and patients, we can get much better blood pressure control over time, and that's pretty good to get 85-95% of people getting good blood pressure control. And this is some other data, and I'll just get you to look at this line. Before the Quality and Outcomes Framework had CKD in it, the first period of time with CKD in it, and then a 2-year period after that. And what you can see is that blood pressure control went up from 28% to 55%, and the numbers are down there. And that sort of blood pressure will have massive impact in terms of the risk of stroke and myocardial infarction and other major vascular events in that population, and is likely to have very beneficial effects within the risk of renal failure. So what else? We set out, as I said, to reduce crash landers. What this shows is data over time from 2005 to 10. It's the latest data we've got, and in these sort of, whatever is that sort of washed out murky colour there, we can see the proportion that are known to kidney services for 12 months or longer, and that's increased. So the number of people just known to kidney services for less than 3 months has gone from over 30% to under 20% in the space of 5 years, and could go as low as 5 or 6%. So I think that's directly attributable to the fact that GPs are engaged in earlier management of kidney disease. What is a bit more difficult to explain, and almost certainly is multifactorial, and I won't go into it in great detail, is the fact that although renal replacement therapy seems to be increasing as expected, you know, you can put a ruler on that and know what's going to happen in the future, total number of people on dialysis and transplantation over the last 30 years or so. It is actually changing. It's changing quite dramatically, and you can see that change here. Just look at, this is renal registry data, just look at England, because England's a bigger country than the other home countries, and therefore there's less noise in the system. Over the last 3 or 4 years, the number of people starting dialysis and transplant programs has stabilised out at 109 per million of the population. We expected it to increase year on year until at least 2030. So the number of people requiring dialysis is starting to fall. The total number receiving it hasn't fallen yet, but it's starting to fall despite the fact we have an epidemic of obesity and diabetes. So that's an intriguing result. And the prediction would be that in 2 or 3 years' time, total number of people on dialysis may actually fall if we have a favourable wind in terms of transplantation. So what did we learn? The importance of actually having a story and a social movement to drive this forward. You can't just legislate for it and have rules and regulations. People have got to believe in the concepts, and we've got to support people to transfer the knowledge out there. Publish performance so that people can, you know, be irritated about the fact that, you know, these league tables don't mean anything, and whilst they don't mean everything, they do mean something, and they do focus people on what is measured. Therein lies a problem. If we measure things that are unimportant, we do make them important. And then patient participation. So I'm going to move into the second part of the talk and move away. We used to have ward rounds where then Dr. Keller and myself used to talk a lot to one another, and we used to have trainees and nurses and others, pharmacists, so on, and we used to chat a lot about things and they were great ward rounds, and we'd occasionally talk to the patient. And I don't think we're as bad as the cartoon suggests, but we certainly weren't as good as we might have been, and I'm sure that Professor Keller is much better now. Anyway, of course, the technology allows us to explain things a lot easier for people. And what's also apparent is that we need to look at value and quality through the eye of the patient, the service user. So this is Michael Porter, who's a very famous economist from Harvard. And he's devoted the last 10 years or so to a little bit of his time to thinking about health and writing about health. And you know, some of the Affordable Care Act thinking comes from the likes of Michael Porter. As somebody said to me, what needs to happen is the doctors need to get down from their pedestals and the patients need to get up off their knees, and we need to have a more mature relationship and discussion there. And understand that whilst we have a certain amount of expert knowledge, for instance, we do know, we can stratify people and we know what the outcomes are likely to be. We don't always give that information to people. It's actually quite difficult to dig it out and sort of be able to say, well, in our kidney unit, if you're 78 and you're female, you've got 2 comorbidities, you will not live any longer having dialysis than having dialysis. But that's the sort of figures that we need to divulge to people so that they can factor that into the decisions that they will make about what's important to them. What will they trade off in terms of the choices they may have. So we can use technology in very innovative ways now. We can demystify, we can allow people in on the secret there. And this is some unpublished data about people's involvement in making choices. 10 years ago, there was a project, a SIRS project. Graham Wood in the audience was our person on that committee, and we asked people. We thought we were pretty good at asking people about what modality of dialysis they wanted. We asked 1,000 people. 40% said the nurses chose for the patients. Shame on the nurses. 40% said the doctors chose for the patients. 10% had to have a particular form of dialysis because for medical reasons. 10% thought they were involved in actually making the decisions at that time. And again, we thought we were reasonably good. And look now, a very, very small percentage feel they're directed and they're not supported in making the choices and having good discussions. So that's quite a change. So the final few slides, well, what about the future? And I think it's acute kidney injury. The next decade, the issue will be acute kidney injury for the kidney world and for more generally as well. So this is taken from a few years ago. Times Online about the NCPOD report, the National Confidential Inquiry into Patient Outcomes and Deaths, looking at kidney failure. And this is a slide of the Blitz. So crush injury is a major cause of acute renal failure. We used to call it acute renal failure. I won't go into why the name's changed, or I won't try and advocate that acute kidney injury is a perfect name for discussing it with our patients and their carers. But the lessons of conflict actually are really quite startling from an acute renal failure perspective. So in World War II, more soldiers died as a consequence of acute renal failure than directly from their wounds. And by the Korean War, when there was fluid replacement in the theatre of war, that was started to be reduced. By the Vietnam War, and none of you will remember, but the Vietnam War, there were lots of these massive aircraft carriers in the South China Sea, and they were actually really big dialysis units. They'd be bigger even than the West London Renal Centre, I would say. And so all the soldiers, they were getting obviously plasma in the field, but they were getting dialysis so they would recover from their acute kidney injury, because it is a temporary affair in young patients. And in the current wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, there have been no soldiers that have required dialysis. Only one soldier's required dialysis back in Birmingham, where people get shifted back. So despite the terrible injuries that people get, fluid replacement and attention to detail and protection of the patient protects the kidney as well. And there's lessons to learn there, I think, for the more vulnerable population that comes into hospital, this hospital and all hospitals, and don't get adequate fluid, don't get their medicine stopped, and don't have the attention to basic care that we know benefits people. So anyway, the NCPOD was aptly titled Adding Insult to Injury. 50% of people got good care, 50% of people got bad care. I won't read it all through there. Basically, 30% of people, or 20 to 30% of people who die with acute kidney injury or of acute kidney injury have predictable and avoidable acute kidney injury. So I think it's negligent. That's at least 12,000 deaths per year. That's 10 times more than Mid-Staff's Francis inquiry. And it is the vulnerable that get that. And we've got the same sort of problem. We had all these funny old terms that are difficult to define, and now we've latched onto the really snappy acute kidney injury. But at least it's a unifying term, and we have a staging system. And again, I'm not going to go through this in detail, and some people will be surprised to see, just a 26 micromole increase in serum creatinine. That's not much. We wouldn't have really sort of raised our eyebrows about that 10 years ago. And yet we know, this is US data, but there's also UK data, we know that even a 20 to 35 micromolar increase in serum creatinine has a profound effect on, this is odds of death, hospitalisation costs, everything would track with the same thing. So a minor increase in serum creatinine increases risk of death by 5 times. Clearly that's not all avoidable, but some of that is avoidable. And of course, the population who are at risk are largely this chronic kidney disease population. They've got the highest risk of acute kidney injury. There are about 3 million people with chronic kidney disease. 2 million of them are on primary care registers. The other million are not yet identified. And acute kidney injury, acute drops in kidney failure, sometimes people get better. But as we look at a frailer, already damaged kidney population, it's more likely that these steps down during episodes of sepsis or inappropriate prescribing or other acute events that you don't get recovery and you get a move towards end-stage renal failure. So it's not just a linear progression in the rate of decline. Like we used to think about kidney disease, proteinuria kidney disease, linear decline, you can plot out when people are going to need end-stage renal failure treatment. That's not the case, and AKI interacts with that. And it's a big problem. Again, it costs in excess of £1 billion, so approaching 1% of the NHS spend. In fact, 5% of the in-hospital spend is directly related to acute kidney injury, increased lengths of stay largely. Nothing to do with more dialysis, very, very little to do with dialysis down at the end there. And the issue is, whilst we don't have specific treatment, we do know that good basic care has a very, very big impact on the development of acute kidney injury. So final slide, really just to say that there's nothing new in the world at all. And this is a painting from Brussels from a few hundred years ago. And some of you might be surprised to know that 100 years before blood pressure was ever measured, the actuaries in London weighted life insurance on the basis of albuminuria. So proteinuria is a major cardiovascular risk factor. And of course, unlike statins for cholesterol, we don't have a major pharmaceutical driver to put this in front of people, but it is a major modifiable risk factor. So thanks very much for staying the course. At least it's not a beautiful evening that you've been denied. Happy to have questions, happy not to have questions, whatever suits.